Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. So today we are continuing with the Read Aloud series where I'm reading aloud all the Twilight books on this channel, and we are continuing with Life and Death, Twilight Reimagined by Stephenie Meyer, and we will be continuing with chapter 15, which is called The Cullens. But before we begin the reading, I just have to make the quick disclaimer that I do not own any of the text being presented here, nor am I trying to present any of the text as my own. This is all simply a read aloud that I'm doing on the channel for entertainment purposes, and it's all in fair use. And again, this is chapter 15, The Cullens in Life and Death, Twilight Reimagined by Stephenie Meyer. The muted light of another cloudy day eventually woke me. I lay with my arm across my eyes, groggy and dazed. Something, a dream trying to be remembered, struggled to break into my consciousness. I moaned and rolled on my side, hoping more sleep would come, and then yesterday came flooding back into my memory. Oh! I sat up so fast it made my head spin. Your hair also has the ability to defy gravity. Her amused voice came from the rocking chair in the corner. It's like your own superpower. Automatically, I reached up to pat my hair down. She sat cross-legged in the chair, a perfect smile on her face. You stayed. It was like I hadn't woken up after all. Of course, that's what you wanted, correct? I nodded. She smiled wider. It's what I wanted too. I staggered out of the bed, not sure where I was going, only that I needed to be closer to her. She waited for me, and there was no surprise on her face when I sank to my knees in front of her. I reached up slowly and laid my palm against the side of her face. She leaned into my hand, her eyes slipping closed. Charlie? I asked. We'd both been speaking at normal volume. He left an hour ago with an amazing amount of gear. He'd be gone all day. So it was just me and Edith in an empty house with no need to go anywhere. So much time. I felt like some crazy old miser gloating over his piles of gold coins, only instead of coins, it was seconds that I hoarded. It was only then that I realized she'd changed her clothes. Instead of the thin striped tank top, she wore a peach-colored sweater. You left? I asked. She opened her eyes and smiled, putting one of her hands up to keep mine against her face. I could hardly leave in the clothes I'd came in. What would the neighbors think? In any case, I was only gone for a few minutes, and you were very deeply asleep at that point, so I know I didn't miss anything. I groaned. What did I say? Her eyes got a little wider, her face more vulnerable. You said you loved me, she whispered. You already knew that. It was different, hearing the words. I stared into her eyes. I love you, I said. She leaned down and rested her forehead carefully against mine. You are my life now. We sat like that for a long time until finally my stomach grumbled. She sat up, laughing. Humanity is so overrated, I complained. Should we begin with breakfast? I threw my free hand over my jugular, my eyes wild. She flinched, then her eyes narrowed and she scowled at me. I laughed. Come on, you know that was funny. She was still frowning. I disagree. Shall I rephrase? Breakfast time for the human? Okay, I need another human minute first, if you don't mind. Of course. Stay. She smiled. I brushed my teeth twice again, then rushed through my shower. I ripped through my wet hair with a comb, trying to make it lie flat. It ignored me pretty thoroughly. And then I hit a wall. I'd forgotten to bring clothes with me. I hesitated for a minute, but I was too impatient to panic long. There was no help for it. I tucked the towel securely around my waist and then marched into the hall with my face blazing red. Even better, the patch of red on my chest was exposed too. I stuck my head around the edge of the doorframe. She was still in the rocking chair. She laughed at my expression. Shall we meet in the kitchen then? Yes, please. She was past me in a rush of cool air, down the stairs before a second had passed. I was barely able to follow the motion. She was just a streak of pale color, then nothing. Thanks, I called after her, then hurried to my dresser. I knew I should probably put some thought into what I wore, but I was in a hurry to get downstairs. I did think to grab a pullover so she wouldn't worry about me getting cold. I raked my fingers through my hair to calm it again, then ran down the stairs. She was leaning against the counter, looking very at home. What's for breakfast? I asked. That threw her for a minute. Her eyebrows pulled together. I'm not sure. What would you like? I laughed. That's all right. I fend for myself pretty well. You're allowed to watch me hunt. I got a bowl and a box of cereal. She returned to the chair she'd sat in last night, watching as I poured the milk and grabbed a spoon. I set my food on the table, then paused. The empty space in front of her on the table made me feel rude. Can I get you anything? She rolled her eyes. Just eat, Bo. I sat at the table, watching her as I took a bite. She was gazing at me, studying my every movement. It made me self-conscious. I swallowed so I could speak, wanting to distract her. Anything on the agenda today? Maybe, she said. That depends on whether or not you like my idea. I like it. I'll like it, I promised as I took another bite. She pursed her lips. Are you open to meeting my family? I choked on my cereal. She jumped up, one hand stretched toward me helplessly, probably thinking about how she could crush my lungs if she tried to give me the Heimlich. I shook my head and motioned for her to sit while I coughed the milk out of my windpipe. I'm good, I said when I could speak. Please don't do that to me again, Bo. Sorry. Maybe we should have this conversation after you're done eating. Okay, I needed a minute anyway. She was apparently serious. But I guess I'd already met Archie and it hadn't been that bad. And Dr. Cullen too. But that had been back before I'd known Dr. Cullen was a vampire, which changed things. And while I had known with Archie, I didn't know if he knew that I knew, and that felt kind of an important distinction to me. Also, Archie was the most supportive, according to Edith. There were others who were obviously not as generous. I've finally done it. I've finally done it, she murmured when I swallowed the last bite and then pushed the bowl away. What did you do? Scared you. I thought about that for a moment, then held up my hand, fingers spread, and waved it from side to side in the international symbol for kinda, yeah. I wouldn't let anyone hurt you, she assured me, but that just made me worry more that someone royal would want to, and she would get in between to rescue me. I didn't care what she said about holding her own and not fighting fair. That idea really freaked me out. No one would try, Bo. That was a joke. I don't want to cause you any problems. Do they even know that I know? She rolled her eyes. Oh, they're quite up to date. It's not really possible to keep secrets in my house. Well, with our various parlor of tricks, Archie had already seen that your dropping by was a possibility. I could feel a variety of expressions rippling across my face before I could control it. What all did Archie see last night? My face got hot. I saw her eyes narrow the way they did when she was trying to read my mind. Just thinking about what Archie might have seen, I explained before she could ask. She nodded. It can feel invasive, but he doesn't do it on purpose. He sees so many different possibilities. He doesn't know which will happen. For example, he saw over 100 different ways that yesterday could have gone, and you only survived about 75% of the scenarios. Her voice got very hard. And you only survived about 75% of the scenarios. Her voice got very hard at the last part, her posture brittle. They'd taken bets, as to whether I would kill you. Oh, her expression was still rigid. Do you want to know who's sided for and against? Maybe not. Tell me after I meet them. I don't want to go into this prejudiced. Surprise erased the anger from her face. Oh, you'll go then? It seems like the respectful thing to do. I don't want them to think I'm shady. She laughed, a long, bell-like peal. I couldn't help but smile. Does that mean I get to meet Charlie too then? She asked eagerly. He's already suspicious, and I'd rather not be shady either. Sure, but what should we tell him? How do I explain? She shrugged. I doubt he'll struggle too hard with the idea of your having a girlfriend, though it's a loose interpretation of the word girl, I'll admit. Girlfriend, I mumbled. Sounds not right, not enough. Mostly it sounded transitory, something that didn't last. She stroked one finger down the side of my face. Well, I don't know if we need to give him all the gory details, but he will need some explanation for why I'm around here so much. I don't want Chief Swan putting a restraining order on me. Will you really be here? I asked, suddenly anxious. It seemed too good to be true, something only a fool would count on. As long as you want me. I'll always want you, I warned her. I'm talking about forever here. She put her fingers against my lips, and her eyes closed. It was almost like she wished I hadn't said that. Does that make you sad? I asked, trying to put a name to the expression on her face. Sad seemed closest. Her eyes opened slowly. She didn't answer. She just stared into my eyes for a long time. Finally, she sighed. Shall we? I glanced at the clock on the microwave automatically. Isn't it a little, wait, forget I asked that. Forgotten? Is this okay? I wondered, gesturing to my clothes. Should I dress up more? You look... She smiled. She suddenly dimpled up. Delicious. So you're saying I should change? She laughed and shook her head. Never change, Beau. Then she stood and took a step toward me so that her knees were pressed against mine. She put her hands on either side of my face and leaned down till her face was just an inch from mine. Carefully, she reminded me. She tilted her head to the side and closed the distance between us. With the lightest pressure, her lips touched mine. Carefully, I shouted in my head. Just don't move! My hands balled into fists. I knew she would feel the blood pulsing into my face. Slowly, her lips moved against mine. As she got more sure of herself, her lips were firmer. I felt them part slightly, and her breath washed cool across my mouth. I didn't inhale. I knew how her scent made me do stupid things. Her fingers stroked from my temples to my chin and then hooked under my jaw and pulled my lips tighter to hers. Careful! I shouted at myself. And then out of nowhere, the dizzy, hollow, ringing sound started up in my ears. At first, I couldn't concentrate on anything but her lips, and then I started to fall down the tunnel, and her lips were getting farther and farther away. Beau? Hey, I tried to say. What happened? Are you all right? The sound of her anxiety helped bring me around. I wasn't totally gone, so it was fairly easy. I took 2 deep breaths and opened my eyes. I'm fine, I told her. She was leaning away, but her arms were stretched out to me. One hand was cold on my forehead, the other on the back of my neck. Her face looked paler than usual. Just kind of forgot to breathe for a minute there. Sorry. I took another deep breath. She eyed me doubtfully. You forgot to breathe? I was trying to be careful. Suddenly, she was angry. What am I supposed to do with you, Beau? Yesterday I kissed you and you attacked me. Today you pass out. Sorry. She sighed deeply, then darted in suddenly to kiss my forehead. It's a good thing that it's physically impossible for me to have a heart attack, she grumbled. That is good, I agreed. I can't take you anywhere like this. No, I'm fine, really. Totally back to normal. Besides, your family is going to think I'm insane anyway, so what's the difference if I'm a little unsteady? She frowned. You mean more unsteady than usual? Sure, look, I'm trying not to think about what we're going to do now, so it would help if we could get going. She shook her head, but took my hand and pulled me out of the chair. This time she didn't even ask. She just headed straight for the driver's side of my truck. I figured there was no point in arguing after my latest embarrassing episode, and anyway, I had no idea where she lived. She drove respectfully, without any complaints about what my truck could handle. She took us north out of town, over the bridge at the Kalwa River, and continued till we were past all the houses and onto the close-packed trees. I was starting to wonder how far we were going when she abruptly steered right onto an unpaved road. The turnoff was unmarked and almost totally hidden by thick ferns. The trees landed close on both sides, so you could only see a few yards ahead before the road twisted out of sight. We drove down this road for at least a few miles, mostly east. I was trying to fit this lane into the vague map I had in my head, not very successfully, when there was suddenly some thinning of the forest. She drove into a meadow, or was it a lawn? It didn't get much brighter, though. There were 6 enormous cedars, maybe the biggest trees I'd ever seen, whose branches shaded an entire acre. They pushed right up against the house in the middle of the lawn, hiding it. I don't know what I expected, but it definitely wasn't this. The house was probably 100 years old, 3 stories high and kind of graceful, if that word could be applied to a house. It was painted a soft faded white, and all the windows and doors looked original, but they were probably in too good shape for that to be true. My truck was the only car in sight. When Edith shut off the engine, I could hear the sound of a river somewhere close by. Wow, you like it? It's really something. Suddenly, she was outside my door. I opened it slowly, starting to feel the nerves I'd been trying to suppress. Are you ready? Nope, let's do this. She laughed, and I tried to laugh with her, but the sound seemed to get stuck in my throat. I mashed my hair flat. You look great, she said, then took my hand casually, like she didn't even have to think about it anymore. It wasn't a big thing, but it distracted me. It made me feel just a little bit less panicky. We walked through the deep shade up to the porch. I knew she could feel my tension. She reached across her body to put her free hand on my forearm for a second. Then she opened the front door and walked inside, towing me behind her. The inside was even less like I was expecting than the outside. It was very bright, very open, and very big. It must have started out as several rooms, but most of the walls had been removed from the first floor to create one wide space. The back, south-facing wall had been entirely replaced with glass. Past the cedars, the lawn was open and it stretched down to a wide river. A massive staircase dominated the west side of the room. The walls, the high ceiling, the wooden floors, and the thick carpets were all different shades of white. Edith's parents were waiting for us. They stood just to the left of the door, on the side left of the door, on a little platform in front of a huge grand piano. It was also white. I'd seen Dr. Cullen before, of course, but it hit me again how young she was and how outrageously beautiful. She was holding hands with Ernest, I assumed. He was the only one of the family I'd never seen before. He seemed about the same age as Dr. Cullen, maybe a few years older, and had the same pale, perfect features as the rest of them. He had wavy hair, the color of caramel, a few inches longer than mine. It was something really kind. There was something really kind about his face, but I couldn't put my finger on what it was that made me think that. They were both dressed casually in light colors that matched the inside of the house. They smiled, but made no move to approach. I thought they were probably trying not to scare me. Corinne? Ernest? This is Beau, Edith said. You're very welcome, Beau. Corinne stepped forward, slow and careful. She raised her hand hesitantly. I stepped forward to shake, and I was kind of surprised by how okay it felt to do that. Maybe it was because she reminded me of Edith in a lot of ways. It's nice to see you again, Dr. Cullen. Please, call me Corinne. I grinned at her, surprised that I felt pretty confident. Corinne, I repeated. Edith squeezed my hand lightly. Ernest stepped forward as well, offering his hand. His cold stone grasp was just what I expected. It's very nice to know you, he said sincerely. Thank you, I'm glad to meet you too. And I was. This felt right. This was Edith's home, her family. It was good to be a part of it. Where are Archie and Jess? Edith asked. No one answered because they just appeared at the top of the stairs. Hey, Edie's home! Archie called, and then he streaked down the stairs, just a blur of pale skin, coming to a sudden stop right in front of us. I saw Corinne and Ernest shooting warning glances at him, but I kind of liked it. It was natural for him, how they moved when they didn't have to worry about strangers watching. Beau, he greeted me, enthusiastic, like we were old friends. He held out his hand, and when I went to shake it, he pulled me into one of those one-armed bro hugs, thumping me lightly on the back. Hey, Archie, I said. My voice sounded winded. I was shocked, but also a little pleased they really did seem supportive. None more than that. Like he already liked me. When he stepped back, I saw that I wasn't the only one who was shocked. Corinne and Ernest were watching my face with wide eyes, like they were waiting for me to make a run for it. Edith's jaw was locked, but I couldn't tell if she was worried or mad. You do smell good. I never noticed before, Archie commented. Oh, God. Very different from Alice. Oh, God. I mean, he does have some of Alice's tendencies, but this is definitely something there. Archie. My face got hot, and then hotter when I thought what that must look like to them, and nobody seemed to know what to say. Then Jessamine was there. Edith had compared herself to a hunting lion, which was hard for me to picture, but I could easily picture Jessamine that way. There was something like a lion about her now when she was just standing there. But despite that, I was suddenly totally comfortable. It felt like I was in my own place, surrounded by people I knew well. Easy. Kind of like when Jules was around. It was strange to feel that here. And then I remembered what Edith had told me about what Jessamine could do. That was weird to think about. It didn't feel like someone was using magic or whatever on me. Hello, Beau, Jessamine said. She didn't approach or offer to shake my hand, but it didn't feel awkward. Hello, Jessamine. I smiled at her, and then the others. It's nice to meet you all. You have a very beautiful home, I added conventionally. Thank you, Ernest said. We're so glad that you came. He spoke with feeling, and I realized that he thought I was brave. I also realized that Royal and Eleanor were nowhere to be seen, and while I was relieved, I was also kind of disappointed. It would have been nice to get that out of the way with Jessamine here, making me feel calm. I noticed Corinne gazing meaningfully at Edith with a pretty intense expression. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Edith nod just slightly. I felt like I was eavesdropping, so I looked away. My eyes wandered over to the beautiful piano on the platform. I suddenly remembered a childhood fantasy that when I was older and somehow a millionaire, I was going to buy a grand piano for my mother. She wasn't really good. She only played for herself on our second-hand upright, but I loved to watch her play. She was happy, absorbed. She seemed like a new mysterious person to me then. She'd put me in lessons, of course, but like most kids, I whined until she let me quit. Ernest noticed my stare. "Do you play?" he asked. I shook my head. "Not at all. But it's really beautiful. Is it yours?" "No," he laughed. "Didn't Edith tell you she was musical?" She hasn't mentioned it, but I guess I should have known, right?" Ernest raised his eyebrows, confused. "Is there anything she's not good at?" I asked rhetorically. Jessamine barked out a laugh. Archie rolled his eyes, and Ernest gave Edith a very fatherly look, which was impressive considering how young he seemed. "I hope you haven't been showing off," he said. "It's rude." "Oh, just a little bit," Edith laughed. The sound was infectious, and everyone smiled, including me. Ernest smiled the widest, though, and he and Edith shared a brief look. "Edith, you should play for him," Ernest said. "You just said showing off was rude." "Make an exception," he smiled at me. "I'm being selfish. She doesn't play enough, and I love to hear her." "I'd like to hear you play," I told her. She gave Ernest a long, exasperated look, then turned the same look on me. When she was done, she dropped my hand and walked up to sit on the bench. She patted the spot next to her and then looked back at me. "Oh," I mumbled, and went to join her. As soon as I sat down, my fingers her fingers started flowing across the keys, filling the room with a piece so complex and full it was impossible to believe only one person was playing. My mouth fell open in shock, and I heard chuckling behind me. Edith looked at me casually while the music surged around us without a break. "Do you like it?" I got it immediately. "Of course. You wrote this." She nodded. "It's Ernest's favorite." I sighed. "What's wrong?" "I'm just feeling a little insignificant." She thought about that for a minute, and then the music changed slowly into something softer, something familiar. It was a lullaby she'd hummed to me, only 1,000 times more intricate. "I thought of this one," she said quietly, "while I watched you sleeping. It's your song." The song turned even softer and sweeter. I couldn't speak. Then her voice was normal again. "They like you quite a bit, you know. Ernest especially." I glanced behind me, and the big room was empty. "Where did they go?" "Giving us some privacy." "Subtle, aren't they?" I laughed, then frowned. "It's nice that they like me. I like them. But Royal and Eleanor?" Her expression tightened. "Don't worry about Royal. He's always the last to come around." "Eleanor?" She laughed sharply. "Elle thinks I'm a lunatic." "It's true, but she doesn't have a problem with you. She's off trying to reason with Royal now." "What did I do?" I had to ask. "I mean, I've never even spoken to—" "You didn't do anything, Beau, honestly. Royal struggles the most with what we are. It's hard for him to have someone on the outside know the truth, and he's a little jealous." "Ha!" She shrugged. "You're human. He wishes he were too." That brought me up short. "Oh!" I listened to the music. My music. It kept changing, evolving, but the heart of it stayed the same. I wasn't sure how she did it. She didn't seem to be paying much attention to her hands. "The thing Jessamine does feels really not strange, I guess. It was kind of incredible." She laughed. "Words don't fully do it justice, do they?" "Not really. But does she like me?" She seemed... "That was my fault. I told you she was the most recent to try her way of life. I warned her to keep her distance." "Oh." "Indeed." I worked hard not to shudder. "Corinne and Ernest think you're wonderful," she told me. "Ah, I really didn't do anything very exciting." Shook a few hands. "They're happy to see me happy. Ernest probably wouldn't care if he had a third eye and webbed feet. All this time he's been worrying about me. Afraid I was too young when Corinne changed me, that there was something missing from my essential makeup. He's so relieved. Every time I touch you, he bursts into applause." "Archie's enthusiastic." She made a face. "Archie has his own special perspective on life." I looked at her for a moment, weighing her expression. "What?" she asked. You're not going to explain what you mean by that, are you? Her eyes narrowed as she stared back at me, and a moment of wordless communication passed between us, almost like I'd seen between her and Kareen before, except without the benefit of mind reading. I knew she wasn't telling me something about Archie, something her attitude toward him had been hinting at for a long time, and she knew that I knew, but she wasn't going to give anything away. Not now. Okay, I said, like we'd spoken all that out loud. She said, and because I just thought of it, so what was Kareen telling you before? She was looking at the keys now. You noticed, did you? You noticed that, did you? I shrugged. Of course. She stared at me thoughtfully for a moment before she answered. She wanted to tell me some news. She didn't know if it was something I would share with you. Will you? It's probably not a good idea. My behavior might be a little odd for the next few days or weeks, a little maniacal, so it's best if I explain myself beforehand. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong exactly. Archie just sees some visitors coming soon. They know we're here and they're curious. Visitors? Yes, like us but not. Their hunting habits are not like ours. I mean, they probably won't come into town at all, but I won't be letting you out of my sight till they're gone. Wow, shouldn't we? I mean, is there a way to warn people? Her face was serious and sad. Kareen will ask them not to hunt nearby, as a courtesy, and most likely they won't have a problem with that. But we can't do more for a variety of reasons. She sighed. They won't be hunting here, but they'll be hunting somewhere. That's just how things are when you live in a world with monsters. I shivered. Finally a rational response, she murmured. I was beginning to think you had no sense of self-preservation at all. I let that one pass, looking away, my eyes wandering again around the big white room. It's not what you expected, is it? She asked, and her voice was amused again. No, I admitted. No coffins, no piled skulls in the corners. I don't even think we have cobwebs. What a disappointment this must be for you. I ignored her teasing. I didn't expect it to be so light and so open. She was more serious when she answered. It's the one place we never have to hide. My song drifted to an end, the final chords shifting to a more melancholy key. The last note lingered for a long moment, and something about the sound of that single note was so sad that a lump formed in my throat. I cleared it out, then said, Thank you. It seems like the music had affected her too. She stared searchingly at me for a long moment, and then she shook her head and sighed. Would you like to see the rest of the house? She asked. Will there be piled skulls in the corners? Sorry to disappoint. Well, okay, but my expectations are pretty low now. We walked up the wide staircase hand in hand. My free hand trailed along the satin-smooth rail. The hall at the top of the stairs was paneled in wood the same color as the floorboards. She gestured as we passed the doors. Royal and Eleanor's room, Kareen's office, Archie's room. She would have continued, but I stopped dead at the end of the hall, staring with raised eyebrows at the ornament hanging on the wall above my head. Edith laughed at my expression. Ironic, I know. It must be very old. I guessed. I kind of wanted to touch it. To see if the dark patina was as silky as it looked, but I could tell it was pretty valuable. She shrugged. Early 1630s, more or less. I looked away from the cross to stare at her. Why do you have this here? Nostalgia. It belonged to Kareen's father. He collected antiques? No, he carved this himself. It hung on the wall above the pulpit in the vicarage where he preached. I turned back to stare at the cross while I did the mental math. The cross was over 370 years old. The silence stretched on as I struggled to wrap my mind around the concept of so many years. Are you all right? She asked. How old is Kareen? I asked quietly, still staring up. She just celebrated her 362nd birthday, Edith said. She watched my expression carefully as she continued, and I tried to pull it together. Kareen was born in London in the 1640s, she believes. Time wasn't marked as accurately then, for the common people anyway. It was just before Cromwell's rule, though. The name pulled up a few disjointed facts in my head from a world history class I had had last year. I should have paid more attention. She was the only daughter of an Anglican pastor. Her mother died in childbirth. Her father was a hard man, driven. He believed very strongly in the reality of evil. He led hunts for witches, werewolves, and vampires. It was strange how the word shifted things, made the story sound less like a history lesson. They burned a lot of innocent people, of course. The real creatures they sought were not so easy to catch. Crean did what she could to protect those innocents. She was always a believer in the scientific method, and she tried to convince her father to look past superstition to true evidence. He discouraged her involvement. He did love her, and those who defended monsters were often lumped in with them. Her father was persistent and obsessive. Against the odds, he tracked some evidence of real monsters. Crean begged him to be careful, and he listened to an extent. Rather than charge him blindly, he waited and waited for a long time. He spied on a coven of true vampires who lived in the city sewers, only coming out by night to hunt. In those days, when monsters were not just myths and legends, that was the way many lived. His people gathered their pitchforks and torches, of course. She laughed tartly and waited where the pastor had seen the monsters exit into the street. There were 2 access points. The pastor and a few of his men poured a vat of burning pitch into one, while the others waited beside the second for the monsters to emerge. I realized I was holding my breath again and made myself exhale. Nothing happened. They waited a long time and then left disappointed. The pastor was angry. There must have been other exits, and the vampires had obviously fled in fear. Of course, the men with their crude spears and axes weren't any kind of danger to a vampire, but he didn't know that. Now that they were warned, how would he ever find his monsters again? Her voice got lower. It wasn't hard. He must have annoyed them. Vampires can't afford notoriety, or these probably would have simply massacred the entire mob. Instead, one of them followed him home. Crean remembers the night clearly, for a human memory. It was the kind of thing that would sicken your mind. Her father came home very late, or rather very early. Crean had waited up, worried. He was furious, ranting and raving about his loss. Crean tried to calm him, but he ignored her. And then there was a man in the middle of their small room. Crean says he was ragged, dressed like a beggar, but his face was beautiful and he spoke in Latin. Because of her father's vocation and her own curiosity, Crean was unusually educated for a woman in those days. She understood what the man said. He told her father that he was a fool and he would pay for the damage he had caused. The preacher threw himself in front of his daughter to protect her. I often wonder about that moment. If he hadn't revealed what he loved most, would our stories all have changed? Would all of our stories have changed? She was thoughtful for a few seconds, and then she continued. The vampire smiled. He told the preacher, "Go to your hell knowing this. That what you love will become all you hate. Will become all that you hate." He tossed the preacher to the side and grabbed Corrine. She seemed lost in the story, but now she stopped short. Her eyes came back to the present, and she looked at me like she'd said something wrong, or maybe she thought she'd upset me. "What happened?" I whispered. When she spoke, it was like she was choosing each word carefully. "He made sure that the preacher knew what would happen to Corrine, and then he killed the preacher very slowly while Corrine watched, writhing in pain and horror." I recoiled. She nodded in sympathy. The vampire laughed. Corrine knew her fate if someone found her in this condition. Anything infected by the monster would have to be destroyed. She acted instinctively to save her own life. Despite the pain she was in, she crawled into the cellar and buried herself in a pile of rotting potatoes for 3 days. It's a miracle she was able to keep silent, to stay undiscovered. It was over then, and she realized what she had become. I wasn't sure what my face was doing, but she suddenly broke off again. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "I'm good. What happened next?" She half smiled at my intensity, then turned back down the hall, pulling me with her. "Come on then," she said. "I'll show you." Okay, so obviously, oh man, this chapter, I like how it was written out, and I like the differences made here. Like, particularly, obviously, Beau wouldn't throw himself into Edith's lap or anything like that at all whatsoever, for very obvious purposes. But ultimately, What I do love about this chapter in particular is the juxtaposition. Like, obviously, Edith doesn't ask him, oh, you're not worried about going off to meet a house full of vampires. You're just worried that they won't approve of you or whatever. No, like, definitely not. Like, I don't think that even needed to be said there. But ultimately, what I do like about this is the difference in Kareen's story as opposed to Carlisle's story, in the sense that Kareen, she, like, obviously giving into, like, the old-fashioned gender roles. Of course, she stayed home while her father went off to do that. But the fact that it was changed so that she was, like, turned into a vampire right in front of her father as he died slowly and painfully right in front of her. Oh my God. Like, I cannot even imagine. Like, Kareen's story is so much harsher than Carlisle's ever was. Like, oh my God. Like, I wasn't expecting to read that portion, especially when it says that the vampire told Kareen's dad, go to your hell knowing this, that what you love will become all that you hate. Like, holy shit. That was like, whoa, that really, really surprised me there. It really did. But obviously, like, the biggest difference here would be Archie's, like, response to meeting Belle, like, grabbing him into, like, a hug, like they're long lost friends or something like that. Like, obviously his mannerisms are very, very different from Alice's, but for obvious reasoning, it's more or less the same, I would say, but definitely there are lots of differences in the way how things are written in particular. So ultimately, like, what I do like about this is the difference to Kareen's backstory in particular, how even though her father, like, was frustrated with the fact that she didn't see things, like, his way, even though even though she, like, disagreed with him time and time again, like, even in that moment, like, when he came home, he was trying to protect her. He was trying to protect, his daughter in every sense of the word, and the fact of the matter also is that Kareen, she was more educated than most women were at the time. Because remember how it was in the 1640s. Women didn't really receive an education. Women didn't have that many rights back then. And so Kareen, the fact that she was so educated and understood what this vampire was saying, like, in Latin back when, Latin is a dead language. We know that. But the fact that vampires can speak Latin, like, we damn well know that is the deadest language ever. So this vampire had to have been around for a long time to be able to speak Latin. I mean, it's a dead language. You can read it, you can write it, but you can't speak it. So the fact that this vampire was speaking freaking Latin, I'm telling you, like, man, must have been damn old. Must have been, like, as old as, I would say, ancient Rome is, for sure. But Kareen's story is definitely so interesting, like, just as interesting as Carlisle's, but it's a lot more heartbreaking in a lot of ways, because obviously with Kareen, the fact that this happened right in front of her father, and the fact that he had to watch that all happen, like, oh my God, man. But, of course, Kareen's father was just as intolerable as Carlisle's biological father was, considering, the whole idea of, like, Anglican pastors who were more than willing to discriminate against any, like, different religion. You know what I mean? Like, that is something that I struggle with when it comes to faith and stuff like that. But Kareen's outlook on faith, I would say, is definitely something that mirrors mine very much, because the idea that anybody would use their personal faith as a means to judge other people and try to force them into a specific way of life, I have a very hard time with that. And I think Stephenie Meyer has a very hard time justifying that as well. Like, you can definitely see, like, her views reflected, but she even makes it very clear that you don't necessarily have to agree with her on everything. But ultimately, what I do like is that even so, like, you can tell that she has, like, very reasonable, like, points of view when it comes to sort of thing, when it comes to faith and stuff, because, you know, at the end of the day, she is Mormon, so of course she's going to put some of her personal belief systems into these books, but overall, like, the way how she does it, I wouldn't say that it's intolerable. I think she actually does it in a way that is very interesting, and it doesn't come off as preachy. It doesn't come off as something that makes it very clear that if you disagree with her, you're intolerable or something like that. Like, she definitely doesn't seem to have much tolerance for people who claim, oh, you know, if you disagree with me, you're 100% wrong and I'm the only one that's right. You disagree with me, you question me, you're wrong. Like, obviously she wants you to ask questions for sure, and she's very good at putting that into her story. She's very good at writing things in her material that makes you ask questions, and she constantly makes you ask questions, and that's what I personally enjoy about her writing in particular and how she does it. Like, that's definitely something that I notice more and more and more every single time I read these books, is that it just makes me question so many things, and it makes me ask so many internal questions. And obviously, we're going to get more and more of Kareen's backstories in chapter 16, which is called Kareen. And what I have a feeling I'm going to love about this chapter is that it's going to explain the Volturi and, like, put a name to the coven that Kareen had lived with in Italy. Like, obviously, a name is going to get put to it, the Volturi. And we're going to see a different version of the Volturi in particular from the first Twilight. Like, obviously, in the first Twilight, it was Aro, Marcus, and Caius. But this is a very different version of the Volturi, and something that I'm very excited to read about, because if this did ever get made into, like, a mini-series or a movie, like, would we see, like, this different version of the Volturi? Like, would they behave differently? Would they act differently? Like, would their mannerisms be somewhat different than how it was if it was when Aro was the leader of the Volturi? Because obviously when Aro was leading, you know, the Volturi, we saw a lot of things happen, and a lot of it was not good. Like, they were tyrants is what they were, truly. And the best way I can describe the Volturi is that the way how I describe them, the way I compare them, is to the Camarilla in Vampire the Masquerade. And I just learned that Vampire the Masquerade is attached to a completely different, like, tabletop style role-playing game that has, like, multiple different games to it, like Werewolves, Werewolf the Apocalypse, I think it's called. Yeah, like, there's definitely a lot of elements to this that I definitely see. Like, the tabletop role-playing game for that universe, for Vampire the Masquerade, that came first before Twilight, and I wonder if Stephenie Meyer took any influence of, like, the descriptions of the Camarilla and all of that, and really sort of bled that into, no pun intended, but bled that into her tellings of the Volturi and how she shaped them up to be in particular. So ultimately, what I love about this chapter is how it really goes out of its way to explain how Kareen's backstory is slightly different than Carlisle's, but it definitely does mirror Carlisle's in a lot of ways, and I really enjoyed reading it. Like, it was definitely harsher, but ultimately, like, for Kareen's story arc, obviously, it had to be that way, and ultimately, that's my thought on it. Like, I wasn't expecting to see much of a difference with Kareen's story, but now that I see a bit of a difference there, I like it. I really do love this chapter, the Cullens, and ultimately, I'm excited for chapter 16, which is called Kareen, and man, we are almost there. We're almost finished. Like, look how much more we have to go here. Man. So, man, if I do, like, 3, 4, 5 more readings tomorrow, we could be pretty much almost finished here. So, anyway, that's it for today, guys. So, if you guys enjoyed the reading of this this chapter in particular, you can leave comments down below and leave a like on the video. And if you're brand new, be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notifications bell so you never miss any of the content, because that's the only way that you're going to be able to get any notifications on the videos. God bless, happy viewing, and have a nice day, everybody. See ya!